The night my ex-husband slapped me in front of 1,000 people, I smiled. I know how that sounds. Like I'd lost my mind. Like the shock had cracked something inside me. But that wasn't at all. I smiled because in that moment, watching Adrian Vale's hand connect with my cheek under the crystal chandeliers of the Riverside Grand Ballroom, I knew something he didn't. Something nobody in that room could possibly understand. He thought he was destroying me. He had no idea what I was building. Let me take you back to that night. The annual Vale Foundation Charity Gala. Black ties, designer gowns, champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's rent. I'd been invited, surprisingly, 3 years after our divorce was finalized. 3 years since he'd taken everything. The company we'd built together. The penthouse overlooking the city. Even my reputation. I walked in wearing a simple navy dress. Nothing flashy. Nothing that screamed for attention. I'd learned the power of being underestimated. Adrian was at the center of it all, naturally. Tall, commanding, surrounded by admirers and sycophants. His new girlfriend draped on his arm like expensive jewelry. Victoria something, a PR executive with sharp cheekbones and sharper ambition. She'd been his assistant when we were married. Funny how that works. If you've ever been humiliated and stayed silent, if you've ever had a smile while your world burned down around you, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button. Comment the words, "I rise in silence." Because this isn't just my story. This is for everyone who's ever been counted out, written off, left for dead. This is for us. Hi viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The trouble started during the toasts. Adrian took the microphone, all charm and confidence, thanking everyone for their generous donations. Then his eyes found mine across the room. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or irritation that I dare to show my face. You know, he said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom, success isn't just about having good ideas. It's about having the strength to execute them. Some people talk. Others build empires. The crowd murmured approval. They had no idea he was talking about me. My ex-wife, Serena, is here tonight. He gestured toward me with his glass. Every head turned. Every eye found me standing alone near the back. She used to think she was the brains behind our operation. Isn't that right, Serena? My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face calm. Neutral. I'd practiced this expression in the mirror for months. But ideas without execution are just dreams, Adrian continued. And dreams don't pay the bills. Dreams don't build companies. Dreams don't change the world. He was walking toward me now. The crowd parted like water. Victoria watched with a satisfied smirk. She thought this was entertainment. They all did. Adrian stopped 3 feet away, close enough that I could smell his cologne. The same one he'd worn the day he served me divorce papers. The same one he'd worn the morning he locked me out of my own office. "You should have stayed away, Serena," he said quietly. Then louder for the audience. "Some people never learn when they're beaten." That's when he raised his hand. That's when the room went absolutely silent. That's when his palm connected with my cheek with a crack that echoed off marble floors and designer walls. And that's when I smiled. Not a big smile. Not dramatic. Just a small, knowing curve of my lips. Because Adrian Vale had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and in 90 days, everyone in this room would know it. Because he thought he'd destroyed me. But he had no idea what I was building. 3 years before that night, I sat in a studio apartment that smelled like old carpet and broken dreams. The divorce was final. The bank accounts were empty. Adrian had taken everything, and I mean everything. The lawyers he could afford were better than the ones I couldn't. Simple math. Brutal outcome. I remember staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror that first morning. Dark circles under my eyes. Hair I hadn't washed in 3 days. A woman I barely recognized. The Serena who'd built strategies and closed deals and turned a startup into an empire worth $200 million had vanished. In her place stood this hollow thing wearing yesterday's clothes. But here's what nobody knew. Here's the secret I carried like a weapon waiting to be loaded. I wasn't just Adrian's wife. I was the architect. Every major deal he celebrated, every expansion that made headlines, every strategic move that Wall Street praised, it came from me first. Late nights at our dining table, sketching out market analyses on napkins. Early mornings before he woke up, building financial models that would reshape entire industries. He presented them. He signed the contracts. He took the credit. And I let him, because that's what you did when you love someone. You lifted them up. You made them shine. Stupid, right? The apartment was in a part of town where car alarms were the local soundtrack. Rent was $800 a month, and some weeks I wasn't sure I'd make it. I'd applied to 17 companies in the first month. 17 rejections. My name was poison in the business world. Adrian had made sure of that. If you know what it's like to start over from nothing, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself piece by piece while the world watched and whispered, I need you to subscribe right now. Hit that button, because you're part of a community that rises without permission. We don't wait for anyone to save us. We save ourselves. I landed a job at a tiny real estate firm called Cornerstone Properties. They operated out of a converted warehouse on the east side. 3 agents, 1 receptionist, and a boss named Margaret who wore cardigans with cat pins and didn't ask questions about my past. The work was simple. Cold calls, property showings, paperwork that never ended. I made $12 an hour plus commission. Some weeks I brought home $200. Some weeks less. But I was learning, watching, studying the market from the ground up in a way I never had before. When you're at the top, you miss things. Details, patterns, the small movements that signal big changes coming. I started seeing opportunities. Distressed properties in neighborhoods on the edge of transformation. Commercial spaces sitting empty because nobody understood their potential. Pieces of a puzzle that nobody else was putting together. And I had 90 days. 90 days before investment I'd hidden away, buried so deep that Adrian's lawyers never found it, would mature. A single account in my maiden name, opened 2 months before he filed for divorce. Call it intuition. Call it paranoia. Call it a woman who saw the signs and refused to be completely defenseless. $300,000. Not much compared to what I'd lost. But enough. Just barely enough. I worked during the day. At night, I studied. Market reports. Property records. Adrian's company filings. All public information. I mapped out his empire like a general studying enemy territory, because that's what it had become. Enemy territory. Margaret caught me one night, still at my desk at midnight, surrounded by papers and cold coffee. "You're too good for this place," she said quietly. "Whatever you're running from, whatever happened before, you're too good for this." I looked up at her. This woman who'd given me a chance when nobody else would. "I'm not running from anything," I told her. "I'm running towards something. There's a difference." She smiled, patted my shoulder, and left me to my work. 89 days remaining. Then 88. Then 87. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was strategizing. And as the world forgot my name, I began to write a new one. The magazine arrived on a Tuesday. I was showing a property to a young couple, pointing out the updated kitchen and good bones, when my phone buzzed. A text from an old colleague. Just 2 words and a link. "I'm sorry." The link took me to Business Weekly's cover story. There was Adrian, looking sharp in a charcoal suit, standing in front of floor-to-ceiling windows with the city spread behind him like he owned it. Maybe he did. The headline read, "Adrian Vale, the visionary who built an empire from nothing." From nothing. I had to read it twice. The article was 6 pages of praise. His brilliant mind. His innovative strategies. His ruthless efficiency. They quoted CEOs and investors, all of them falling over themselves to compliment his genius. There was even a section about his childhood, his humble beginnings, his determination to succeed against all odds. My name appeared once. A single sentence in the 4th paragraph. Vale's brief marriage to college sweetheart Serena Halden ended amicably in 2019. Amicably. That's what they called it when a man takes everything and leaves you with nothing. I finished the showing on autopilot. The couple loved the place. I'd barely heard them. That night, I sat in my apartment and let myself feel it. The anger, the injustice, the absolute fury of being erased from your own story. I cried for maybe 20 minutes. Then I stopped. Crying didn't pay bills. Crying didn't build empires. Crying didn't change anything. But strategy did. If you've ever watched someone take credit for your work, if you've ever been written out of your own success story, comment "I remember" right now. Because remembering is the first step. Forgetting is what they want. We don't forget. The business world had discarded me completely. Job applications went unanswered. Networking events felt like walking through a room where everyone could see through you. Adrian's new girlfriend, Victoria Chun, made sure of that. She was good at her job, I'll give her that. PR executive turned romantic partner turned gatekeeper of his reputation. She'd spread the story carefully. Serena was difficult to work with. Serena had emotional problems. Serena couldn't handle the pressure of running a real company. Serena was dead weight that Adrian had carried for years out of loyalty and love. The lies were surgical, precise, impossible to fight without looking defensive, and defending yourself just makes you look guilty. She understood that. She was smarter than Adrian in some ways. More dangerous. I saw them once, about 8 months after the divorce. I was leaving a coffee shop downtown, and they were getting out of his car. His new car. A Tesla that cost more than my entire year's salary. She was laughing at something he'd said, her hand on his arm, looking at him like he was the most fascinating person alive. He saw me. Our eyes met for maybe 3 seconds. I waited for something. Guilt, maybe. Regret. Recognition of what he'd done. Nothing. He looked right through me like I was a stranger. Then he turned back to Victoria, and they walked into the restaurant where we used to celebrate our anniversaries. That hurt worse than the slap would. 3 years later. At least the slap acknowledged I existed. But here's what nobody knew. Here's the second secret. The one that kept me going through the rejection and the poverty and the nights when I thought about giving up entirely. The bankruptcy everyone assumed I'd suffered. Strategic. Planned. The accounts they thought were empty. Redirected. The money they thought was gone. Hidden. I'd moved everything I could before the divorce was final. Not much. Adrian's lawyers were thorough. But I'd learned from him, after all. I knew how to hide assets in plain sight. Shell companies with boring names. Accounts in my maiden name. Investments buried in paperwork so dense that even good lawyers would miss them. $300,000, growing quietly in a fund that nobody was watching. 73 days remaining. He thought I was finished. But sometimes disappearing is just the first move. Sometimes you have to let them think you're dead before you can come back to life. 89 days remaining, and I made my first move. Margaret had a client selling a small commercial building on Berkeley Street. Nothing special. 3 stories, outdated wiring, plumbing from the 70s. The neighborhood was rough. Empty storefronts, graffiti, the kind of place people drove through quickly with their doors locked. But I've been studying, reading city planning documents, zoning changes, infrastructure proposals, and buried in the municipal budget for next year was a line item that made my heart race. Light rail expansion, with a station planned 2 blocks from Berkeley Street. The information was public. Anyone could find it. But nobody was looking. Nobody except me. The building was listed at $400,000. Too much for me. But the seller was motivated. The property had been sitting for 8 months, and I'd learned something working at Cornerstone. Everything is negotiable when people are desperate. I offered $280,000. Cash. Close in 30 days. The seller countered at $320,000. I walked away. Then I waited. 3 days later, they called back. $300,000, final offer, take it or leave it. I took it. If you've ever bet everything on yourself, if you've ever risked it all, when everyone told you to play it safe, double tap that like button right now. Comment silent power and let me know you understand. Because strength doesn't need an audience. Power doesn't need permission. We move in silence and let the results speak. The paperwork closed on Friday. I stood outside that building with the keys in my hand, looking up at cracked windows and peeling paint, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, solid, terrifying hope. I spent the next 60 days transforming that property. Not with money I didn't have, but with vision. I cleaned it myself, painted it myself, called in favors from contractors who owed Margaret nothing, but did the work anyway because I paid in cash and didn't ask questions about permits. The bottom 2 floors became retail space. The top floor, office suites. I priced everything reasonably. Not cheap, but fair. The neighborhood might be rough now, but it wouldn't be for long. My first tenant was a coffee shop owner named Rita who'd been priced out of downtown. She signed a 3-year lease and cried when I handed her the keys. "Nobody else would even look at this area," she said. "Thank you for taking a chance." I didn't tell her I wasn't taking a chance. I was making a calculated investment. There's a difference. 56 days remaining. Then 40. Then 30. I worked during the day at Cornerstone. At night, I managed my property. On weekends, I studied Adrian's company. The Vail Group had grown, but growth creates vulnerability. Cracks in the foundation. Overextension. Departments that didn't communicate. Subsidiaries that operated like independent kingdoms. I started noticing things. Small things. A commercial real estate division that was underperforming. Warehouses sitting empty in industrial zones. Properties they'd acquired during the expansion and then forgotten about. Nobody was watching those assets. They were too small to matter to a company pulling in hundreds of millions a year. But to someone like me, someone building from scratch, they were perfect. I created a company. Nothing fancy. Just an LLC called Meridian Holdings. Filed the paperwork online for $200. No press releases. No announcements. Just a name on a form that nobody would ever notice. Then I started buying. Not from Adrian directly. That would be too obvious. But from the smaller companies that held contracts with his subsidiaries. Service providers. Suppliers. The invisible infrastructure that kept his empire running. I paid cash. I closed fast. I stayed quiet. By day, I was Serena Halden, real estate agent making $12 an hour. By night, I was building something Adrian would never see coming. A shadow empire constructed in the gaps of his vision. 28 days remaining. I remember one night particularly clearly. I was alone in my apartment, surrounded by paperwork and property documents and financial projections. The city lights spread out beyond my window, and somewhere out there, Adrian was probably at some expensive restaurant or exclusive club, celebrating another victory. He didn't know that every celebration brought him closer to me. Every success made him more careless, more confident, more blind. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back wasn't the broken thing from 3 years ago. She stood straighter, moved differently, thought differently. I was no longer surviving. I was strategizing. And the distance between those two things is the difference between being a victim and being dangerous. 56 days remaining, and the real work began. The Vail Group had 17 subsidiaries. Most people knew about the big ones. Vail Properties, Vale Capital, Vale Construction. Those were the companies that made headlines and closed billion-dollar deals. But buried in the corporate structure were smaller operations. Support businesses. Service companies. The boring, unglamorous pieces that kept everything running. And because they were boring, nobody paid attention to them. Not the board. Not the investors. Certainly not Adrian. I paid attention. There was a warehouse logistics company called Apex Supply. They handled shipping and storage for 3 of Adrian's commercial properties. The company was profitable, but barely. The owner was 67 and ready to retire. He'd been trying to sell for 2 years. I bought it for $450,000. Everything I had left plus a small loan I'd taken against my Berkeley Street property. The transaction went through Meridian Holdings. No connection to me personally. Just another boring business deal that nobody would notice. Suddenly, I controlled the supply chain for 3 major Vail properties. Not enough to shut anything down. Not enough to cause problems. Just enough to have leverage. Just enough to have a seat at a table I wasn't supposed to be sitting at anymore. Next was a commercial cleaning service. Then a security company. Then a maintenance contractor. Small purchases. Quiet acquisitions. Each one connecting me deeper into the infrastructure of Adrian's empire. I was becoming a ghost in his machine. Present but invisible. Powerful but silent. The beauty of it was the paperwork. Everything was legal. Everything was documented. I wasn't stealing anything. I wasn't breaking any laws. I was just buying struggling businesses that happened to have contracts with the Vail Group. If Adrian's lawyers looked, which they wouldn't, They'd see a small company called Meridian Holdings making smart investments in service industries. They'd never connect it to me. They'd never think to look. 39 days remaining. My life split into two completely separate realities. During the day, I was still showing apartments and making cold calls for Cornerstone. Margaret had promoted me to senior agent. I was pulling down almost $40,000 a year now. Not much, but stable. Respectable. At night, I was someone else entirely. I studied contracts, negotiated deals, built relationships with business owners who had no idea who I really was. They saw a young entrepreneur with cash and vision. They never asked about my past, and I never volunteered information. There was a man I dealt with sometimes. Daniel Park. He ran a commercial real estate investment firm. Mid-40s, kind of eyes, sharp mind. He'd helped me structure some of the Meridian acquisitions, and one night, after closing a deal, he asked me to dinner. Not business, just dinner. I said yes. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I was tired of being alone. Maybe because he looked at me like I was interesting, not damaged. Maybe because I needed to remember that I was still human, still capable of connection that wasn't about revenge or strategy. We went to a small Italian place in his neighborhood. Nothing fancy. Red checkered tablecloths and wine in actual glasses. He asked about my life, and I told him a version of the truth. Divorced, rebuilding, working hard. He didn't push for details, didn't pry, just listened and nodded and made me laugh for the first time in months. When he walked me to my car, he didn't try to kiss me, just said, "I'd like to do this again sometime. If you would." I thought about Adrian, the way he'd looked through me outside that restaurant, the way he'd erased me from his story, the way he'd taught me that love was just another weapon people use to hurt you. Then I looked at Daniel, this man who didn't know my history, who saw me as I was now, not as I'd been. "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it. 28 days remaining. The Berkeley Street property was thriving. Rita's coffee shop had lines out the door. 2 more retail spaces had leased. The office suites were fully occupied, and the light rail construction had just been announced publicly. Property values in the area jumped 30% overnight. I'd bought for $300,000. The building was now worth close to $900,000. In 6 months, I'd tripled my investment. But I didn't sell, because I wasn't building wealth just to have wealth. I was building power, and power requires patience. Meridian Holdings now controlled 6 companies that did business with the Vail Group. Not enough for Adrian to notice. Not enough to raise flags. But enough that if I wanted to, I could create problems. Supply delays. Service interruptions. Small inconveniences that would add up to major headaches. I didn't. Not yet. Because the goal wasn't to hurt him. The goal was to own him. And you can't own something you've destroyed. I sat in my apartment one night, looking at the web of companies I'd acquired. The connections, the contracts, the quiet empire I was building in the shadows of his success. Somewhere across the city, Adrian was probably sleeping in the penthouse that used to be ours. Probably lying next to Victoria. Probably dreaming about his next big deal. He had no idea I existed in his world again. He thought I'd disappeared, faded away, become irrelevant. And as he toasted another victory at another gala, surrounded by people who celebrated his genius, he didn't know he was drinking to my success. He didn't know that every subsidiary he ignored was another piece I was quietly taking. He didn't know that the woman he'd slapped and humiliated and erased was slowly, carefully, methodically taking everything he'd built. Not with violence, not with drama, just with strategy, just with silence, just with the same brilliance he'd stolen from me years ago. 14 days remaining, then 7, then 3, and then the countdown would hit 0 and everything would change. 7 days remaining, and the penthouse went up for sale. I saw the listing on a Wednesday morning. Scrolling through luxury property alerts I'd set up months ago, and there it was. The address I'd memorized. The view I used to wake up to. The home Adrian had promised would be ours forever. Asking price, $4.2 million. The listing agent's notes were careful, discreet, motivated seller, quick close preferred. Which meant Adrian needed cash fast. Which meant something in his empire was cracking. I made a call, not to the listing agent, to my banker, The one who'd watched me turn 300,000 into something much larger. The one who understood that quiet money moves faster than loud money. I need 4 million liquid in 6 days, I told him. He didn't ask why, just said, I'll make it happen. I sold the Berkeley Street property. Sold it for $1.1 million to a developer who'd been circling for months. Took the cash, added it to the revenue from my subsidiaries, added it to investments I'd been carefully growing. Did the math 3 times to make sure it was real. For $0.3 million. Enough to buy the penthouse. Enough to pay cash. Enough to close in 72 hours if needed. I called the listing agent. Made an offer. For $1 million even. All cash. Close in 5 days. No inspection. No contingencies. No questions. She called back in 2 hours. The seller accepts. He seems relieved, honestly. Can you really close that fast? I can close tomorrow if he wants, I said. But let's do Friday. I like Fridays. Friday was day 0. The day everything changed. If this moment moved you, if you understand what it means to take back what was stolen from you, I need you to share this video right now. Send it to someone who needs to remember that silence is power. That patience is a weapon. That sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming untouchable. The closing happened in a lawyer's office downtown. Mahogany furniture, leather chairs, windows overlooking the financial district where Adrian's company headquarters stood like a monument to his success. I wore white, a simple dress, nothing flashy, hair pulled back, minimal makeup. I looked like someone who belonged in rooms like this. Because I did. I always had. The seller's attorney handled everything. Adrian didn't attend. Too busy, apparently. Too important to watch his former home change hands. He signed the papers remotely. Probably didn't even read them. Probably just saw the deposit hit his account and moved on to his next meeting. He never saw my name on the documents. Everything went through Meridian Holdings. Legal. Clean. Invisible. I signed the last paper at 3:47 in the afternoon. The lawyer slid a key across the table. Not the old key. A new one. Fresh. Unmarked. Congratulations, Ms. Halden, he said. The property is yours. I held that key in my hand. Felt its weight. Thought about the woman who'd been locked out of this building 3 years ago. The woman who'd cried on the sidewalk while security guards watched. The woman everyone thought was broken. She wasn't here anymore. She'd been rebuilt into something stronger. I drove to the penthouse alone. Parked in a garage where Adrian's Tesla used to sit. Took the private elevator that opened directly into the living room. The elevator that required a special key. A key I now owned. The doors opened. I stepped into sunlight. Everything was gone. Adrian had taken the furniture. The art. The Italian marble coffee table he'd spent 6 months selecting. The space was empty except for echoes and light and the view. That view. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. The skyline spreading out like a kingdom. Like a promise. Like proof that some things are worth waiting for. I walked to the window. Pressed my hand against the glass. Felt the warmth of the sun. The same sun that used to wake me when this was my home. When I was someone else. Someone smaller. The woman in the reflection wasn't small anymore. She stood straight. Moved with purpose. Looked at the city like she owned it. Because in a way, she did. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Heard you closed on something big today. Dinner to celebrate. I smiled. Typed back. My place. I'll cook. Come at 8. Another text came through. This one from an unknown number. Just 3 words. Board meeting Monday. My hand started shaking. Not from fear. From anticipation. From 3 years of patience finally reaching its end. Because the penthouse wasn't the goal. It was never about the apartment. It was about what came next. About walking into a boardroom where Adrian thought he was safe. About sitting in a chair he never imagined I'd occupy again. About the look on his face when he realized the game had changed. When he understood that the woman he'd erased had been writing herself back into the story the entire time. The same view that once belonged to him now looked out on my piece. And in 3 days, he'd learn what that piece had cost him. 0 days remaining. The countdown was over. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. I woke up in the penthouse, in a bedroom that used to be ours, now mine alone. The sunrise painted the city gold through windows I'd watched Adrian close the curtains on 1,000 times. I took my time getting ready. Black suit. Tailored. Expensive but not flashy. Hair down. Simple jewelry. I looked like power that didn't need to announce itself. Power that just existed. The board meeting was scheduled for 10. The Vale Group headquarters. 47th floor. Conference room with a table that seated 20 and windows that made you feel like you were floating above the world. I've been in that room exactly once before. 6 years ago, Adrian had brought me to show off the space after they'd signed the lease. "This is where we'll change everything," he'd said. He meant it as we. He delivered it as him. My phone rang at 8:30. "Margaret." "Serena, I have a weird question. Did you buy the Vale Group?" I paused. "Why do you ask?" "Because there's a press release going out this morning about new majority shareholders, and the holding company name looks familiar. Meridian Holdings. That's you, isn't it?" Smart woman. I'd always known she was smarter than she let on. "Don't worry about your job," I said. "You're coming with me." "Regional director. Triple your current salary. I'm going to need people I trust." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, you took down Adrian Vale." "I didn't take him down," I said. "I just stopped holding him up. There's a difference." I arrived at Vale headquarters at 9:45. Walked through the lobby where security used to know my name. They didn't recognize me now. I was just another person in a suit. Another face in the crowd. The elevator ride to 47 felt like flying. Like falling. Like both at the same time. The doors opened. Adrian's assistant sat at the desk outside the conference room. Young. Nervous. Probably Victoria's replacement after Victoria graduated to girlfriend. "I'm here for the board meeting," I said. She checked her tablet. Frowned. "I don't see your name on the list." "Check again." "Meridian Holdings. I'm the representative." Her eyes went wide. Oh my God. "Yes. I'm sorry. Please go in. They're already seated." If you've ever walked into a room where you weren't supposed to be, where everyone thought you were gone forever, hit that subscribe button right now. Hit it and turn on notifications because you need to see what happens next. Comment, "Once discarded, now divine," if you understand that comeback stories aren't about revenge. They're about rebirth. I opened the door. The conference room fell silent. 12 board members. All men except 2. All looking confused because someone new had entered their private space. Adrian sat at the head of the table. His seat. His kingdom. His empire. He glanced up. Our eyes met. I watched the recognition hit him in stages. Confusion first. Then disbelief. Then something close to fear. "What are you doing here?" he said. Not aggressive. Almost a whisper. I walked to the opposite end of the table. The chair that faced his. Nobody stopped me. Nobody moved. "Gentlemen. Ladies." I nodded to the 2 women board members. "My name is Serena Halden, and I represent Meridian Holdings. As of this morning, we hold controlling interest in the Vale Group. 51% of shares acquired through strategic purchases over the past 18 months." Dead silence. You could hear the air conditioning. The traffic 47 floors below. The sound of Adrian's world cracking. "That's impossible," he said. "I would have known. We would have seen it coming." "You were looking up," I said quietly. "At competitors. At threats you considered worthy of your attention. You weren't looking down. At the foundation. At all those boring little companies you thought didn't matter." I opened my briefcase. Pulled out documents. Slid them across the table to the board's legal counsel. Every acquisition was legal. Every purchase documented. Every regulation followed. You can verify all of it. I looked at Adrian. I learned from the best, after all. His face had gone pale. Victoria wasn't in the room. I wondered if she knew yet. If she'd figured out that the empire she'd attached herself to was built on sand. As controlling shareholder, I continued. "I'm exercising my right to restructure the board. Effective immediately. There will be changes to leadership, to management, to the direction of this company." One of the older board members, a man named Richardson who'd always been kind to me years ago, cleared his throat. "Ms. Halden, this is highly irregular." "So it was locking me out of my office," I said. "So it was taking credit for work I did. So it was slapping me in front of 1,000 people at a charity gala. But here we are." Adrian stood up. His hands were shaking. "Serena, Can we talk? Privately. We're talking now, I said. Please. His voice broke. Please. I can explain everything. I can make this right. I looked at him. Really looked at him. This man I'd loved. This man who destroyed me. This man who was just realizing he'd destroyed himself. The meeting starts in 5 minutes, I said. Sit down, Adrian. You're going to want to hear this. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Because revenge isn't just about taking things. It's about what you do with them after. That night, Adrian came to the penthouse. The board meeting had ended 3 hours earlier. The restructuring had been swift, clean, legal. Adrian remained CEO, but with oversight, with accountability, with a new boss standing behind every decision he made. Me. The board had voted, not unanimously, but majority carried. Some of them remembered me from before, remembered that the strategies Adrian took credit for had my fingerprints all over them. They were curious to see what would happen, what I would do with the power I'd taken back. I was standing at the window when the doorman called up. Ms. Halden, there's a Mr. Vale here to see you. Should I send him up? I could have said no, could have made him wait, could have let him stand in the lobby, wondering if I'd even acknowledge his existence. The way he'd done to me 3 years ago outside that restaurant. Send him up, I said. The elevator opened directly into my apartment. That's how penthouses work when you're rich enough. No hallways, no shared spaces, just your elevator and your home. Adrian stepped out. He looked smaller somehow, or maybe I'd just gotten bigger. He stared at the empty space. The view, the home that used to be his. You bought it, he said. Not a question. A statement of fact he was still processing.
I did. Ow! He turned to look at me. How did you do any of this? You had nothing. I made sure you had nothing. You made sure I looked like I had nothing, I said. There's a difference. You taught me that. How to hide assets. How to move money. How to make people see what you want them to see. I was a very good student. He walked to the window, stood where I'd stood that morning. I've been thinking about you, he said quietly. More than I should. More than Victoria would like. Don't, I said. Don't do this. Do what? Pretend you care. Pretend you remember what we were. You erased me. From your life. From your story. From your memory. You don't get to remember me now that it's convenient. He turned around. His eyes were wet. I'd seen Adrian cry exactly once before. The day his father died. He learned early that emotion was weakness. That weakness was unacceptable. I was wrong, he said. About everything. About you. About what mattered. I got caught up in success. In proving I could do it. In being someone people respected and feared. You were always someone people respected, I said. When you were mine, before you forgot that. Before you decided credit mattered more than truth. I know. Do you? Because you took my work and called it yours. You took my strategies and built an empire and never once said my name. You made me invisible. Then you were surprised when I disappeared. I'm sorry. His voice cracked. Serena, I'm so sorry. For all of it. For the divorce. For the gala. For the things I said. For the way I hurt you. If you've ever had someone apologize after it was too late, after the damage was done, after you'd already rebuilt yourself without them, comment, I rose without you right now. Because apologies don't erase pain. They just acknowledge it. And sometimes acknowledgement isn't enough. I walked closer to him. Close enough to see the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. The gray in his hair he was trying to hide. The weight of his empire wearing him down. You slapped me, I said quietly, in front of everyone. Do you remember that? Every day. I remember it every day. Why did you do it? He was quiet for a long time. Then, because you were there. Because you'd stayed away for 3 years. And then suddenly you were at my event, in my space, reminding everyone that you existed. That I'd been married. That my story had a chapter one wanted to forget. And now I realize that chapter was the best part, he said. That everything after was just me running from what I destroyed. Building higher to forget how low I'd gone. I reached out, took his hand, felt his fingers wrapped around mine. The same hands that had built presentations I'd written, signed contracts I'd negotiated, slapped me in front of 1,000 people. You can't have me back, I said. That woman is gone. The one who loved you. The one who would have forgiven anything. She died the day you locked her out. What you're looking at now is what grew in her place. I know, he whispered. But can I hold her hand? Just for a moment? Can I remember what it felt like when we were good? I should have said no. Should have made him leave. Should have used this moment to twist the knife deeper. That's what the revenge fantasy called for. That's what the broken woman from 3 years ago would have wanted. But I wasn't broken anymore. And revenge, I'd learned, isn't about making them hurt. It's about being so whole that their hurt can't touch you. So I let him hold my hand. Let him remember. Let him feel what he'd lost not through my cruelty, but through my absence of need. I didn't need his touch. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need anything from him at all. And that, I think, hurt him more than any words I could have said. We stood there as the sun set over the city. Two people who used to be everything to each other, now standing on opposite sides of a war that was already over. Tomorrow, I said finally, we work together. You report to me. You follow my direction. You rebuild this company the right way. Can you do that? He nodded. Yes. Then go home, Adrian. Go home to Victoria or whoever else you found to fill the space. But know this. Every time you walk into that building, every time you sit in that office, every time you make a decision, you'll be building my legacy now. Not yours. Mine. I pulled my hand away, walked to the elevator, pressed the button to send him back down. He stepped inside, turned to face me as the doors started closing. For what it's worth, he said, I always knew you were brilliant. I was just too afraid to admit you were better. The doors closed. He disappeared, and for the first time, he saw the woman he'd broken standing whole. 3 months later, things had changed in ways I never expected. The Vale Group was thriving under new management. My management. We'd restructured, eliminated redundancies, promoted people based on talent instead of politics. The stock price had jumped 18%. Business magazines were calling it a remarkable turnaround. Adrian was still CEO, still ran day-to-day operations. But he ran them my way now, with transparency, with credit given where credit was due, with acknowledgement that success is a team effort, not a solo performance. We'd settled into a strange rhythm. Professional, respectful, almost friendly. He'd listen to my strategies, implement them faithfully, thank me in meetings in front of everyone. It wasn't redemption, but it was change. Victoria had left him 2 weeks after the board meeting. She'd seen the writing on the wall, saw that Adrian's power had been cut in half, and half power wasn't worth her time. She'd moved on to a tech CEO in San Francisco. I heard she was already engaged. Good for her, I'd said when Adrian told me. She always knew what she wanted. Daniel had become a regular presence in my life. Dinner twice a week. Coffee on Sunday mornings. He knew my story now. All of it. The betrayal. The rebuilding. The calculated takedown. He'd listened without judgment and said simply, you did what you had to do. That takes strength. We'd slept together once. A quiet night after a particularly good day. It wasn't explosive or passionate or desperate. It was gentle, careful. Two people who'd both been hurt learning to trust touch again. Afterward, lying in the darkness of the penthouse, he'd said, I'm not trying to replace anyone. I just want to be here. If you'll let me, I'll let you. I'd said, and meant it. The gala invitation arrived in April. The same gala where Adrian had slapped me. Annual event. Same venue. Same charity. Same people. This time, my invitation came on heavy cardstock. Gold embossing. The Vale Foundation requests the honor of your presence. Below my name, a title, Distinguished Contributor and Board Member. I held the invitation in my hand. Thought about the woman who'd walked into that ballroom a year ago. Alone. Scared. Smiling through humiliation. She becomes someone else. Someone who didn't need to smile through pain because she didn't feel pain anymore. Just power. Just peace. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that dignity is the loudest revenge. I called Daniel. There's an event next month. Black tie. Probably boring. Want to be my date? Is this the gala? He asked. The one where everything happened? Yes. Then absolutely. I want to watch you walk into that room owning everything. If you've ever found peace after pain, if you've ever rebuilt yourself into something stronger than what broke you, hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications because stories like this need to be shared. Comment, I rise in silence. if you understand that the best revenge isn't making them hurt. It's becoming so powerful that their hurt can't reach you anymore. The night of the gala, I dressed in white. Not navy like last year. Not black like armor. White like peace. Like clarity. Like someone who had nothing left to prove. Daniel met me in the lobby. He looked good in a tuxedo, comfortable in his skin in a way Adrian never had been. Adrian had always worn success like a costume. Daniel wore it like a second skin. "You look stunning," he said. "I look like myself," I said. Finally, we walked into the ballroom together. The same chandeliers, the same whispers. But this time, the whispers were different. Respectful, curious. People want to know my story. How I'd done it. How I'd come back from nothing to become someone they needed to know. Adrian was there with no date. He stood alone near the bar, nursing a drink, looking like a man who'd learned that winning isn't everything if you lose yourself in the process. Our eyes met across the room. He raised his glass slightly. Not a toast, just acknowledgement. I nodded back. Not forgiveness, just recognition that we'd both survived the war we'd fought. "Should I be worried?" Daniel whispered. "No," I said. "He's not who I'm here for." "Who are you here for?" I looked around the room, at all the people who'd watched me be humiliated, who'd whispered about my failure, who'd counted me out and forgotten my name. "Myself," I said. "I'm here for myself." The evening passed in a blur of conversations and connections. People wanted to invest with Meridian Holdings. People wanted meetings. People wanted to know my secrets. I gave them the same answer every time. Work without credit. Build without ego. Rise without permission. As the night ended, Adrian approached. Daniel tensed beside me, but I touched his arm gently. "It's okay." "Serena," Adrian said. "Can I say something?" "You can. You were always better than me. At strategy. At vision. At understanding what really matters. I spent years trying to prove I didn't need you. All I proved was that I didn't deserve you. It wasn't an apology. It was better. It was acceptance. Truth. The kind of honesty that only comes after everything else is stripped away. "Thank you," I said, "for teaching me to be strong enough to leave." He smiled. "Sad. Real. Love doesn't die, does it? It just learns where it's safe to live." I took Daniel's hand, looked at Adrian one last time. "No," I said. "It doesn't die. It just becomes wiser." We left him there, walked out into the night air. Tomorrow, the world would see who truly owned the empire. But tonight, I just wanted to be a woman who'd survived, who'd risen, who'd learned that the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something so beautiful that they finally understand what they lost. 1 year later, I stood in that same ballroom for the last time. The gala had become my event now. The Veil Foundation had been restructured under my direction. We funded women entrepreneurs, small businesses, people who'd been counted out by the world that only valued loud success. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were conversations, introductions, partnerships. The same people who'd watched me be slapped 2 years ago now wanted my attention, my time, my approval. I learned something important in those 2 years. Revenge isn't about making them suffer. It's about becoming so successful that their opinion stops mattering. It's about rising so high that you can look back and feel nothing but gratitude that they pushed you to become who you were always meant to be. Adrian had stepped down as CEO 6 months earlier. Mutual decision. He wanted to focus on smaller projects. Teaching, mentoring young entrepreneurs, using his experience to help others avoid his mistakes. We had coffee sometimes, once a month. Professional, friendly. 2 people who'd shared a history but were no longer bound by it. He'd tell me about his students. I'd tell him about Meridian's expansion. We'd laugh about things that used to seem important. "Do you hate me?" he'd asked once. "No," I'd said honestly. "I don't hate you. I don't think about you enough to hate you." That answer seemed to hurt and heal him at the same time. Victoria had sent me a message on LinkedIn. Professional. Brief. "I underestimated you. That was my mistake. Congratulations on everything you've built." I'd replied, "Thank you. Good luck in San Francisco." No animosity. No vitevnis. Just 2 women who'd both learned that attaching yourself to someone else's power is always temporary. Building your own is forever. Daniel and I had moved in together, not to the penthouse. That space was mine alone, but to a house in the suburbs with a garden and room for the life we were building. He proposed 3 months ago. Simple ring. Simple question. Will you share your future with me? I'd said yes. Not because I needed him, but because I wanted him. There's a difference. Need makes you weak. What makes you whole? Margaret ran the East Coast division of Meridian now. 6-figure salary. Company car. Respect she'd earned through decades of quiet competence finally acknowledged. You changed my life, she told me once. You gave me a chance when nobody else would. I'd said. I just returned the favor. Tonight's gala was my goodbye. I was stepping back from the Vail Group, selling my majority shares to a collective of women investors who understood what I'd built and why. Taking Meridian private, focusing on the work that mattered to me. I stood at the front of the ballroom. Same spot where Adrian had humiliated me 2 years ago. The room fell silent. Hundreds of faces turned toward me, waiting, listening. 2 years ago, I stood in this room and learned an important lesson. That humiliation is temporary. That dignity is permanent. But the people who count you out are usually the ones who never understood what you were counting. Quiet laughter, knowing nods. I'm not here for revenge anymore. I'm not here to prove anything to anyone. I'm here because this foundation now funds women who've been told they're not enough, who've been pushed aside, who've been told their ideas don't matter. I paused, looked around the room, found Adrian standing near the back. He was smiling, proud maybe, or relieved that my story had led somewhere other than his destruction. They thought I was broken, I said, but breaking is just the beginning. What you become after is what matters. I was broken, then I was becoming. Now I'm untouchable, not because I'm hard, but because I know my worth. And nobody can take that from me again. The room erupted in applause. Standing ovation. These people who'd watched me fall were celebrating my rise. It should have felt like victory, and it did, but it also felt like release, like closure, like the final page of chapter 1 was ready to close. After the speeches and the dinner and the donations, I walked to the window. The same window I'd stood at after the slap. The same view of the city spreading out like possibility. Daniel found me there, ready to go home, more than ready. As we walked out, I saw my reflection in the glass doors. A woman in white, calm, radiant, complete. Not because a man had validated her, not because the world had finally recognized her worth, but because she'd recognized it herself. Because she'd learned that the best revenge is becoming so whole that your enemies become irrelevant. So powerful that their opinions become whispers lost in the noise of your success. They thought I was broken. I was becoming untouchable. And the distance between those two things is measured not in time, but in choice. The choice to rise. The choice to rebuild. The choice to become someone so extraordinary that your past becomes just a footnote in a story about triumph. He wasn't my ending. He was my awakening. And everything that came after, that was all mine. If this story reminded you that dignity is the loudest revenge, if it showed you that silence is power and patience is a weapon, I need you to do something for me. Comment, I rise in silence right now. Share this video with someone who forgot their worth. Subscribe and turn on notifications because we have more stories coming. Stories about people who rose from ashes, who rebuilt from ruins, who learned that the best revenge isn't about making them hurt. It's about becoming so powerful that their hurt can't touch you anymore. We rise together. We rebuild together. We become untouchable together. This is your reminder that you're not broken. You're becoming. And what you're becoming is extraordinary. See you in the next story. Don't miss it. Your transformation starts now.